Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
You know how it works.
Our listeners send us their sources.
And we do the heavy lifting, pulling out the crucial insights.
Their shortcut to being well-informed.
Precisely. Today, we're diving into a fascinating compilation you shared.
Gear Monster. Catchy title.
It is Gear Monster, a compilation of anabolics and nutritional supplements. Now, a heads up to our listeners.
Some of this stuff delves into sensitive territory.
It does. So it's crucial to clarify our approach right from the start.
We are exploring the information presented in these sources.
Exactly. We're not endorsing any specific viewpoint or practice.
We're just laying it all out.
Now, this Gear Monster compilation is comprehensive.
Oh, it covers a lot of ground. From specific substances like Yohimbine HCL and DNP,
To training strategies.
and a deep dive into the world of diet protein, carbs, fats.
Even insulin's role in bodybuilding.
It delves into the world of performance-enhancing drugs.
A whole section on anabolic steroids, different types, stacking, injection methods, anti-estrogens.
It doesn't stop there. You've got other compounds like clenbuterol, clomid.
And it wraps up with common mistakes people make.
A real treasure trove of information.
It is. And our mission today is to give you a structured overview of the key concepts.
The real meat of this compilation.
Exactly. And maybe some of those intriguing details that stick with you.
So shall we start with Yohimbine HCL?
Let's jump right in. It's often touted for its role in tackling that stubborn fat, right?
Absolutely. Gear Monster describes Yohimbine HCL as a synthetic version of what's found in Yohimbine extract.
So it's a concentrated form of that active ingredient.
Exactly. And the key takeaway here is its supposed ability to release fatty acids from those stubborn fat areas.
You know, those spots that seem resistant to all your efforts.
Exactly. And the compilation suggests this is often linked to estrogen levels.
Ah, so those areas where people typically store fat influenced by estrogen?
Right, or a higher number of what are called A2 receptors, which are, guess what, also influenced by estrogen.
Makes sense. So women and men with those fat distribution patterns might see benefits.
That's what the source suggests.
Now, Gear Monster outlines a few ways to use Yohimbine HCL.
It does, oral ingestion being one of them.
They mention it can have a stimulant effect.
More so than other methods.
Even suggest a tiny dose under the tongue. Sublingually, right?
Yeah, like 10 to 15 minutes before a workout.
Yeah.
But much lower doses than you'd use topically.
Interesting. And they touch on snorting it too.
Briefly and with a lot of caution.
Rightfully so.
Yep.
It sounds intense. But the main focus for fat loss, according to Gear Monster, seems to be topical application.
Directly on the skin.
What struck me was the suggestion of using it twice a day for optimal results.
Interesting.
But they also throw in this idea that smaller, more frequent applications to specific areas might be even better for some.
Tailoring it to your problem spot.
Exactly. They recommend starting with around 20 milligrams, about a scoop.
And they warn about overdoing it. Headaches, tiredness.
Those are clear signs you've pushed it too far. Now, for topical application, they emphasize the carrier.
What you mix it with. Crucial for absorption.
They break it down into organic and menthol-based options.
Organic, they recommend pure liquid aloe vera.
Over the gel form.
Yeah, better absorption. And it keeps your skin hydrated.
Double win. And for menthol-based carriers.
Diluted oils like peppermint, wintergreen, spearmint.
If you're using the pure essential oils, they recommend significant dilution.
8 parts water or aloe vera to 1 part oil.
That's a lot of dilution.
You don't want to irritate your skin.
Good point. And they also suggest using those over-the-counter creams with menthol.
Aspercreme or Bengay.
Here's a curious detail. Some of those creams contain aspirin.
Which, get this, can potentially affect something called oxidative phosphorylation in the skin.
Wow, that's getting into the nitty-gritty.
It's a metabolic process, and aspirin might inhibit it. But here's the kicker. It could also enhance the penetration of Yohimbine HCL.
Fascinating. So aspirin could be a double-edged sword in that context.
Exactly. Now, who does Gear Monster say might benefit most from Yohimbine?
They specifically mention women, right?
Right at the top of the list. And men who tend to store fat in those typical female patterns.
The estrogen-influenced areas we talked about earlier.
Exactly. Also, men who've bulked up using aromatizing compounds.
Those are compounds that convert to estrogen in the body.
Exactly. Things like testosterone or D-bol. Because that increased estrogen can lead to more of those A2 receptors.
Making those fat areas even more stubborn.
Precisely. And lastly, they mention very lean men.
Those guys who are already ripped but struggling with those last bits of fat?
Yeah, and those classic areas, thighs, lower back, love handles.
All right, let's shift gears to a much more serious, potentially dangerous topic.
DNP.
2-phyllophore-dinitrophenol. This is where we need to emphasize the risks.
Definitely.
The source delves into its history. Early uses in dynamite, dies.
And they mention this observation of weight loss in workers handling DNP,
Which led to a study at Stanford back in 1920.
confirming its effect on weight.
It was even sold as a weight loss drug for about 2 decades.
Imagine that.
Until the FDA stepped in and banned it.
For good reason. The source makes that crystal clear.
They highlight that the FDA still considers DNP far too dangerous for the pharmaceutical market.
And they're not alone. It's currently used as a research chemical and as a pesticide in some areas.
You can legally own it.
But you absolutely cannot market or sell it for human consumption.
Now, here's a point that caught my eye. Despite being a phenol compound,
Which are often linked to cancer.
decades of research haven't actually proven DNP to be carcinogenic.
Or mutagenic for that matter.
So, while it's incredibly dangerous in other ways, that specific concern isn't fully substantiated.
At least not yet.
When it comes to dosage and cycle length with DNP, Gear Monster is very straightforward.
Not for beginners. Absolutely not.
Especially not for someone looking to lose a few pounds. They stress the importance of thorough education.
You need to know what you're getting into.
Because it can be fatal if used improperly.
No question about it.
They mention 2 main forms you might encounter.
Pure crystalline DNP and powdered DNP.
Crystalline is 100% dry.
While powdered usually contains some moisture, around 5 to 10%.
The crystalline form is described as more potent, faster acting.
But that also means the effects, both positive and negative, come on and fade more quickly.
Requires even more caution.
Yeah, definitely.
For crystalline DNP, the recommended dosage is between 2 to 6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight per day.
And for the powdered form, it's slightly higher, 4 to 10 milligrams per kilogram.
Beginners are urged to start at the very bottom of that range, see how their body reacts.
Safety first.
They even give an example for a 220-pound man using crystalline DNP.
Starting with just 200 milligrams a day for at least 3 days.
Then increasing very gradually, if at all.
And they mention 400 milligrams a day can be used, but split into 2 doses, 12 hours apart.
200 milligrams every 12 hours, and only the most experienced users under strict supervision should even consider going as high as 600 milligrams a day.
That's pushing the limits.
Now, about the duration, the source originally suggested a maximum of 10 days.
Due to concerns about thyroid suppression.
But they later clarified that this limit is actually arbitrary.
Someone taking a lower dose, like 200 milligrams, might have near normal thyroid function even after 10 days.
But someone on a higher dose, say 600 milligrams, could see their T3 levels plummet after just 3 days.
Now, T3 is crucial for fat loss, but Gear Monster argues that DNP's fat-burning power is so strong
that it compensates for the suppressed T3.
They even suggest this suppression might help prevent muscle loss while you're burning fat on DNP.
Interesting. So a potential silver lining to that hormonal disruption.
In a way. But it's important to note that thyroid function is expected to return to normal within a week after stopping DNP.
Okay, let's transition to a compound we hear a lot about: testosterone.
The cornerstone of many performance-enhancing regimens.
The source provides a sample dosage range, 400 to 800 milligrams every day.
Quite a range.
And they delve into the different types of testosterone.
Specifically, the esters that are attached to the testosterone molecule.
It gets a bit technical here.
It does. But understanding these different esters is key. They affect how quickly the testosterone is released into your system.
And how often you need to inject it.
Which impacts things like water retention and even injection comfort.
Now, they list the esters in order of their release rate, fastest to slowest.
Suspension, which is in water. Then propionate, phenylpropionate, enanthate, cypionate, isocaprot, and finally decanoate.
Quite a mouthful. So those longer esters lead to more water retention.
And stay in your system for longer.
Naturally. And they mention the faster esters can be more painful to inject.
Although that can vary depending on the specific product.
The benzyl alcohol content being a factor.
Exactly. Now let's move on to something that directly affects your workouts.
Peri-workout nutrition.
Fueling your body for optimal performance.
The source gives a clear piece of advice. Avoid sugars or simple carbs within an hour of your workout.
They get very specific about the reasoning too. It all boils down to energy production.
They explain that when you eat sugar, your body releases insulin.
To break down those sugars, and transport them into your cells.
But insulin also sends a signal to ATP, our body's energy currency.
I mean, think of ATP like a fully charged battery,
And insulin tells it to stop converting to ADP.
which is like a partially used battery.
And it's that conversion from ATP to ADP that releases energy for muscle contractions.
Millions of times during a workout.
So insulin essentially interferes with this energy release process.
Exactly. It's like hitting the brakes on your energy supply.
Not ideal when you're trying to push your limits.
Now, let's talk about building muscle, protein, and carbohydrates.
The building blocks.
The source emphasizes that if you're active, you need more protein than the standard RDA.
Which is around 0.4 grams per pound of body weight.
They suggest doubling that amount for a decent intake.
So around 0.8 grams per pound.
But it's not just about protein. The balance between protein and carbohydrates is crucial.
Especially during intense exercise.
If you're not getting enough carbs, your body might actually start burning protein for fuel.
Not what we want.
No. Protein's primary role is muscle repair and growth,
And carbs spare protein by providing readily available energy.
keeping those muscles fueled and growing.
The source makes an interesting point about muscle, strength, and fat burning.
They say that gaining strength increases your fat burning capacity.
The more muscle mass you have, the more fat you burn at rest.
And the stronger your muscles become, the more efficiently they burn fat.
They even point out that you can be strong without being super muscular.
Think of those lean individuals who can lift surprising amounts of weight.
Their muscles are just really good at utilizing fat for fuel.
Efficient machines.
Now let's get into calories. The source defines them simply as a measure of energy in food.
But that energy might not always end up as body fat.
It depends on how your body utilizes those calories.
Exactly.
They emphasize that muscle tissue needs calories to survive,
If you don't provide enough, you'll lose muscle mass,
entering a catabolic state,
where your body breaks down its own muscle for fuel.
especially during intense activity.
Now, if you're working out regularly, you need to consume more calories to support those muscles.
And the great thing is, muscle burns more calories when it's active.
So working out is actually one of the best ways to promote fat loss.
Your muscles demand energy, and they'll tap into your fat stores to get it.
And they make a point that losing muscle mass reduces your fat burning capacity.
Makes sense. Less muscle means less energy expenditure.
The source then challenges the idea of very low-calorie diets.
They see them as counterproductive
While you'll burn fat, you'll also lose muscle mass.
because your body starts breaking down muscle for fuel when calories are scarce.
They argue that losing muscle ultimately makes it harder to lose fat in the long run.
Like trading a $20 bill for 5 fives. You have the same value, but in a less useful form.
Exactly.
They even go so far as to call extreme calorie restriction a counterproductive theory.
Designed to sell diet books.
Provocative.
It is.
They also tackle the common belief that you simply need to eat fewer calories than you burn to lose weight.
Seems logical on the surface,
But they suggest this approach can sometimes be detrimental.
especially for long-term fitness goals.
Instead, they propose that you might even need to eat more calories than you think you burn.
More calories, that's counterintuitive.
It is, but they bring in the role of digestion to explain their reasoning.
Most nutrient absorption happens in the small intestine.
With its blood vessels absorbing nutrients from food.
And muscles that contract to move food along.
They explain that the speed at which food moves through your system depends on your body's need for those nutrients.
If your body senses it needs more energy or building blocks, it'll hold on to food longer.
To maximize absorption?
But if it doesn't sense a high demand, some food might pass through without being fully absorbed.
So a key to preventing fat storage is to prevent your body from feeling like it needs to absorb every single calorie.
Encourage it to take what it needs now and limit the storage of excess.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
They suggest that on a very low-calorie diet,
Your body might become incredibly efficient at absorbing almost everything you eat,
storing it as fat,
while your energy might come from breaking down your own muscle.
counterproductive.
So they argue that simply asking, how many calories does my body need, isn't the right question.
Especially when aiming for muscle growth.
They use an example. If your body burns 2,500 calories a day at rest,
And let's say 20% of your food isn't fully absorbed.
you'd need to eat around 3,000 calories just to avoid muscle breakdown.
And any calories above that could contribute to muscle building.
The question then becomes, how much extra can you eat without storing it as fat?
It's a complex issue. It depends on many factors, including the types of food you eat.
They acknowledge that unused calories likely get stored as fat, But the composition of your diet plays a huge role.
Now, they talk about survival mode.
Our body's incredible ability to live off stored fat when calories are scarce.
Like during famine or hibernation.
But they suggest that if you consistently eat very close to the number of calories you burn,
Your body might get a bit nervous and start storing more as fat.
like a survival mechanism, preparing for potential scarcity.
It's all about percentages. If you drastically reduce your calorie intake,
The percentage stored as fat could increase dramatically,
and your metabolism might slow down to conserve energy.
leaving you feeling drained and sluggish,
Now let's delve into carbohydrates.
fueling our workouts.
The source stresses the importance of complex carbohydrates.
As our body's primary energy source,
They explain that complex carbs are essentially long chains of simple sugar molecules.
monosaccharides being the single sugar units, like glucose and fructose.
And you have disaccharides, two sugar units linked together, like sucrose, which is table sugar.
And finally, polysaccharides, the complex ones.
Many sugar units linked together.
Glycogen being a key polysaccharide in animals.
Our energy storage.
And starch and cellulose in plants.
Starch for energy storage, cellulose for structure.
They point out that we can't actually digest cellulose.
We lack the necessary enzymes.
That's where fiber comes in.
A type of complex carb we can't break down,
But it absorbs water in our digestive system,
creating what's called chyme,
helping with hydration, regularity.
keeping things moving smoothly.
Now, because complex carbs are larger molecules,
Our body takes longer to break them down,
a more gradual process.
and some might even pass through without being fully absorbed.
Plus, digesting them requires energy,
They estimate that some complex carbs might cost you 50 calories to digest,
with only about 25 calories actually absorbed.
leading to the idea that frequent, large amounts of complex carbs could contribute to fat loss.
Due to that partial malabsorption and energy expenditure during digestion.
It's an interesting concept.
It is. Now, what about simple sugars? The source generally recommends avoiding them.
With one exception, post-workout.
They explain that simple sugars are readily absorbed,
They don't require much breakdown.
and they have to be used quickly or stored.
They can be converted to fat, but it's not a direct process,
It involves fatty acids,
which come from the fats we eat,
but simple sugars can contribute to the creation of glycerol,
which combines with fatty acids to form triglycerides.
the main components of body fat.
So why bother with complex carbs if they eventually get broken down into sugars anyway?
The source highlights a key issue with simple sugars:
The rapid spike in blood sugar,
the sugar rush.
followed by a crash due to insulin.
So complex carbs provide more sustained energy.
Without those dramatic fluctuations.
Let's talk more about insulin.
A crucial hormone
The source calls it the most anabolic hormone we know of.
responsible for shuttling nutrients into cells.
But they highlight a downside.
Those rapid spikes caused by simple sugars.
They explain that insulin triggers energy stores to open up,
And fat cells are particularly good at storing excess nutrients as fat,
especially when insulin levels are high.
like after a sugar rush.
Now, they make a crucial distinction.
Insulin doesn't automatically equal fat storage.
Not if levels rise slowly and consistently.
A high-carb, low-sugar diet can achieve this,
It creates a gradual release of sugar into the bloodstream,
resulting in a more stable level of insulin.
which promotes muscle growth without triggering massive fat storage.
Complex carbs are key to this process.
Because they break down slowly, providing a sustained release of glucose.
Fueling our bodies without those insulin spikes,
They reiterate that you don't want high insulin during a workout.
because you need readily available blood sugar for energy,
Our body also has internal sugar stores called glycogen,
which it releases when needed.
and insulin helps regulate those levels,
Consuming too much simple sugar disrupts this balance,
leading to those energy crashes.
making workouts much harder.
Now let's talk about post-workout nutrition.
Replenishing and rebuilding.
The source emphasizes a critical 45-minute window after exercise,
When your body is primed to store energy as glycogen.
rather than as fat.
So sugars and carbs consumed at this time are more likely to be used for fuel and recovery,
This window is most effective within the first 30 minutes.
and starts declining after 45.
They suggest liquid protein and carbs are better than solid food.
Faster absorption,
Whey protein shakes, meal replacement drinks.
getting those nutrients to your muscles quickly.
Solid food takes longer to digest
And they even advise against casein protein at this time.
because it gels in the stomach, slowing
Ah.
down digestion.
Now, they caution against sugar right before a workout.
Again, because of insulin's effects.
It can lead to low blood sugar during exercise.
Hindering performance.
It's like hitting the gas for muscle growth while slamming on the brakes.
Okay, let's shift to dietary fat.
Often misunderstood.
They describe fatty acids as essential for various functions,
Lubricating joints, nerve impulses, hormone production.
including testosterone, which is mostly made up of fatty acids.
But they emphasize that not all fats are created equal,
Saturated fat is described as dense, hard to break down.
and your body readily stores it.
Animal fats tend to be high in saturated fat,
Solid at room temperature.
but they caution against blindly trusting all vegetable oils,
Because many undergo a process called partial hydrogenation.
which turns unsaturated fats into saturated ones.
Not good.
The issue with saturated fat is its tendency to stick together in your blood vessels,
Potentially restricting blood flow.
leading to high blood pressure and increased risk of heart problems.
Now, on the positive side, they highlight the good fats.
Omega-3, omega-6, omega-9.
Essential fatty acids.
Easily broken down, good source of energy.
Omega-3s being superior to omega-9s in that regard.
They recommend supplementing with foods rich in omega-3s.
Fish oils, like cod liver oil.
And flaxseed oil, which they claim has the highest amount of omega-3s.
Now let's get into shock techniques.
Muscle confusion for breaking through plateaus.
Everyone hits a wall at some point.
Putting in the work but seeing no results.
The source recommends evaluating your program.
Consistency, routine, diet, sleep.
They suggest changing your routine every 3 to 4 weeks to keep those muscles guessing.
Muscle confusion.
They provide a whole list of techniques.
One is focusing your mental energy on the specific muscle you're working.
Really feeling that contraction.
Like your hands are just hooks, focusing on that squeeze.
Another technique is varying intensity.
More exercises in the same time
Or the same routine in less time.
requires less rest between sets.
They also suggest heavy and light training days.
Heavy days, 3 to 4 reps with max weight. Light days, 12-15 reps.
Partial repetitions are another technique
Doing only a portion of the full range of motion.
to target specific parts of the muscle.
But they advise against partials for squats.
Not effective for that movement.
Then there's 21s,
7 reps in the first half, 7 in the second half, 7 full reps.
then 100s.
Brutal. Trying to lift a weight for 100 reps
They recommend doing these at the end of your session.
due to the intense fatigue they cause.
They also mention isolating muscles.
Using single joint movements
Leg extensions, bicep curls,
and isotension,
continuously flexing and relaxing the muscles.
even between sets.
Negative repetitions emphasize the lowering phase,
Controlled and slow.
similar to slow repetitions, where you use lighter weight and move very slowly.
Eliminating momentum.
Then there's break the bar,
Gripping the bar as hard as you can, trying to pull it apart.
engaging more muscle fibers.
Supersets involve doing 2 exercises back to back
Same muscle group or opposing groups.
and stripping weight.
Reducing the weight as you reach fatigue.
And I go, you go, training.
Alternating sets with a partner.
And finally, peak contraction.
Squeezing the muscle at the top of the movement.
Now let's get into anti-estrogen drugs.
The source discusses a few options.
Testosterone being the first.
They present it as a poor choice.
Expensive, high dosage needed, potentially blocks androgen receptors,
It's also a controlled substance.
and a relatively weak aromatase inhibitor.
Anastrozole, or Arimidex, is discussed next.
With a clinical dose of 1 milligram per day for maximum estrogen suppression.
Higher doses aren't significantly more effective, according to the source.
And it's expensive.
Compared to tamoxifen,
Some try using lower doses or alternating with tamoxifen to save money.
then there's formastane.
High cost per ampule
They doubt more frequent injections are necessary.
due to its potency.
Okay, let's delve into the general concepts around anabolic steroids.
They divide them into 2 primary classes based on their mechanisms.
Class I, mostly injectables, bind to and activate the androgen receptor.
Which then interacts with DNA to promote muscle growth and prevent breakdown.
Examples include decadorebolin, primobolan, equipoise, anavar.
Class 2, mostly orals, don't bind well to the androgen receptor.
They work through other pathways.
Anadrol, dianabol, Winstrol, halotestin being some examples.
Stacking steroids from these opposing classes can be beneficial,
Because they work through different mechanisms.
leading to potentially greater results.
A common strategy is stacking a testosterone ester, a 17A oral, and maybe another class I injectable.
Testosterone and trenbolone are interesting,
They have dual activity, belonging to both class 1 and class 2.
making them good base compounds for cycles.
Trenbolone binds strongly to the androgen receptor, but has weaker Class II activity.
So stacking it with a Class II oral like Dianabol is common.
Testosterone has moderate androgen receptor binding, but strong Class II activity.
So it's often stacked with a Class II oral and a Class I injectable,
The source also mentions that the effects not directly related to androgen receptor binding
such as influencing growth hormone, IGF-1, satellite cell activation.
are often underestimated in their contribution to muscle growth.
They even give some examples of cutting stacks.
Combining Class I and Class II steroids,
Winstrol with equipoise or primobolan.
and fluoxymestrone with equipoise or primobolan.
Now, what about coming off a cycle?
Recovery is crucial.
The source emphasizes that the waiting time before starting post-cycle therapy depends on the steroids used and the dosage.
Longer-acting esters, like decadurabolin, require a longer wait.
They remain active in your system for longer,
The time on equals time off rule doesn't always apply.
especially with those long esters,
They describe a period of time inefficiency.
where you're not getting the benefits of the steroids, but your natural hormone production hasn't recovered.
The goal is to minimize that wasted time
Now, for optimizing steroid cycles, they recommend more frequent injections.
to maintain stable blood levels.
A good rule of thumb is to inject at half of the steroid's half-life.
So if a steroid has a half-life of 7 days, you'd inject it at least twice a week.
And for cycles with multiple injectables, they recommend basing the frequency on the shortest half-life.
To avoid big fluctuations in androgen levels,
They also suggest switching to shorter-acting esters towards the end of your cycle,
to improve recovery time,
like replacing Deca or Equipoise 4 weeks before the end.
and medium esters like testosterone and anthate or cypionate 3 weeks before.
Examples of shorter-acting replacements are trenbolone acetate and testosterone propionate.
No need to load those short esters at the end.
They're already fast-acting.
Using faster-acting injectables at the end also reduces the waiting time before starting post-cycle therapy.
Like Clomid.
Someone using trenbolone acetate might start Clomid just 5 days after their last injection.
Clomid therapy usually lasts around 4 weeks.
So efficient cycles and recovery can potentially reduce the total time off steroids.
Now, Gear Monster includes a huge section on steroid profiles.
An encyclopedia of different compounds.
We can't go through them all, but let's highlight a few key examples.
Albactazide, for instance,
It's a diuretic, a combination of spironolactone and hydrochlorothiazide.
often used pre-contest for water shedding.
They recommend 1 tablet twice daily for 3 days before a competition.
Not common on the black market, but often prescribed by doctors.
Aldactone, or spironolactone, is another diuretic.
Potassium sparing.
Bodybuilders use it in the final week before a show.
50 milligrams twice a day for 5 to 6 days.
Not for rapid water loss. Expert